The Islamic State is calling on Palestinians to step up their attacks against Israelis. A video posted on an ISIS social media page encourages Palestinians to use knives, explosives, and even poison to kill Israeli civilians and soldiers. Arab and Israeli observers say the recent stabbing attacks by Palestinians appear to copy beheading videos made by ISIS. One Israeli government official told CNN that he is confident the attackers are inspired by ISIS. And joining us now for more is CBN News terrorism analyst Eric Stakelbeck. Eric, what do you say? Are these attackers copying ISIS tactics here?
Well, there's a lot of similarities. Number one, I'll say, Charlene, there's no direct link so far between between ISIS and these Palestinian terror attacks. No direct links, although ISIS is clearly very happy about them and supportive. But what is similar are the tactics, Charlene. And ISIS has been calling for the past year and a half, at least, for Western Muslims in particular to rise up and kind of become these one-man jihads. We saw it in Chattanooga, Tennessee. Here we saw it in Garland, Texas, where American jihadists inspired by ISIS carried out lone wolf-style attacks. Now what we're seeing in Jerusalem, in Hebron, are Palestinians, basically an army, Charlene, of lone wolves carrying out just random, spur of the moment in some cases, stabbing and shooting and rock throwing and terror attacks. So it does absolutely follow the ISIS blueprint in terms of the West, what ISIS has called for here. Lone wolves to rise up, become a one-man or one-woman jihad. That's exactly what these Palestinian terrorists are doing right now, with really, possibly even, Charlene, no organized central command that is ordering them to do so, but they're inspired by the message. And ISIS has been a major game changer, Charlene, on so many levels, and you're seeing the bitter fruits of it right now. Amazing.
Well, Eric, Palestinians set fire to Joseph's tomb. Now, that's similar to ISIS's destruction of Christian historical sites in Syria and Iraq. What's their goal?
Well, they want to erase any signs of biblical history or Christianity or Judaism, the Old Testament, the New Testament, Charlene. They want to erase them and eradicate them from the face of the earth and from the memory of the earth. They want, does ISIS, do Palestinian jihadists? They can have tactical differences, maybe even some theological differences, but at the end of the day, they all want the same thing. They all want this global Islamic caliphate ruled by Islamic Sharia law. In that caliphate that they want, Charlene, there is no room for practicing Christians, observant Jews, or our heritage, our traditions, the Bible. There's no room for that. It must be erased. And particularly in the Palestinian situation, Charlene, look, they're even claiming that the Temple Mount is theirs, that there was never a Jewish temple that stood on the Temple Mount. Well, let me tell you something. Jerusalem is never mentioned, Charlene, not even once in the Quran. It is mentioned hundreds of times in the Bible. So you would hope at the end of the day, the truth wins out.
Yes, indeed. Well, Palestinian leaders say that the Israelis are threatening and desecrating the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Haven't they used this tactic in the past to incite violence?
And they have, Charlene, again and again. And by the way, the Palestinian Authority of Mahmoud Abbas, over the past several years, really the past 2 decades, has deliberately pretty much bulldozed any vestiges, any signs of the ancient temples that stood there. Solomon's temple, Herod's temple, which are obviously talked about in the Bible. Jesus taught at the Second Temple, Herod's temple. Well, there are a lot of temple artifacts there, Charlene, that the Palestinian Authority has deliberately covered up to deliberately try to erase any sign, any proof of the Jewish presence on the Temple Mount and in Jerusalem in general. So this rallying cry that the Jews are desecrating the Temple Mount has been used for decades now. It's not true, Charlene. If you rewind to 1967, before the Six-Day War, when Israel recaptured its eternal capital of Jerusalem, there was no religious freedom in Jerusalem. And at the Temple Mount, only Muslims could worship there. Christians, Jews did not have freedom of religion. When Israel took control in 1967, Charlene, there became religious freedom for all faiths. Christians, Jews, Muslims can all worship now at the Temple Mount, at the Western Wall. I'll tell you, if this goes under Muslim control once again, which is what the Palestinians want, and maybe is what the international community wants, judging by some of their statements towards Israel, there will not be freedom of religion at the Temple Mount for Jews and Christians any longer if these guys get their way.
Well, Eric, John Kerry says that Abbas needs to condemn the violence and stop inciting it. Is that enough?
It's one of the only things I agree with John Kerry on over the past few years. He's exactly right about that, but is he pushing enough? Number one, no. The Obama, it's not enough, Charlene. It's not enough for Abbas just to give these half-hearted condemnations on one hand, where on the other hand, he's cheering the blood of the martyrs of Al-Aqsa. So the Obama administration, which still has some leverage over the Palestinian Authority, over Mahmoud Abbas, should be relentlessly pressuring him, number one. Number two, threatening to withhold funding. Charlene, I think that's the key in this whole situation. Take away the defund the Palestinian Authority. And then maybe they'll stop the incitement. They'll stop the incitement in textbooks where little first and second grade children are learning that the Jews are evil and drink the blood of non-Jews, of Palestinian television where suicide bombing and martyrdom is glorified, in the Palestinian political arena where regularly Palestinian officials, including people directly tied to Mahmoud Abbas, praise these so-called martyrdom operations, the stabbings and everything else. The Palestinians have not been held accountable one iota over the past 7 years by the Obama administration. And if John Kerry really wants to see a difference, maybe he and the Obama administration should start holding Abbas's feet to the fire, and it starts with money.
Well, Eric, ISIS is supporting the Palestinians in their attacks on Israel. The U.S. opposes ISIS in Iraq and Syria, yet we pressure Israel to negotiate with the Palestinians. Does that even make sense?
No, it doesn't, because the Israelis, it's amazing, Charlene, the Israelis are facing the exact same thing that we faced on 9/11, that we faced during the Boston bombing, Fort Hood, Garland, Texas, Chattanooga, on and on. The Israelis are facing this on a regular, daily basis. And let me say, this is a cautionary tale for the West, Charlene. Again, we talked about this during the top of our interview here. This is the blueprint for the West. ISIS wants to make American and European cities really into guerrilla war zones, where you're seeing these smaller scale lone wolf attacks on a regular basis. Look what it can do. Look at some of the unrest right now in Israel, and things are uncertain. It causes psychological, economic terror. That's what ISIS wants to do here in the United States and in Western Europe in our cities. So you are seeing right now what could be, unfortunately, a preview of what could come here to the West if we're not careful. Thankfully, it looks like Israel is getting a handle on it, but how unfair for the West. What would we do in a similar situation, Charlene, if we had this intifada, a jihad, where people in Washington, D.C., where I'm sitting, were being randomly murdered, slaughtered, and stabbed by Islamic terrorists? What would we do? Would we turn around and negotiate with the terrorist? I don't think so. Israel is being held to a standard that no nation should be held to, where Israel is being blamed for what the Palestinians are doing. It's the ultimate in blame the victim, and frankly, it's a disgrace.
Indeed it is. Eric Stakelbeck, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Charlene.